The first paper is about the gender gap between grades, and it will be presented by Beatrice Franzolini, excuse me for my for my Italian, Filippo Albertini, and I'm sorry, I take Spanish. Lorella Camporesi. Is it okay? The floor is yours.
Thank you. Let me just take the slides. Yes. Okay, so hi everyone. I'd like to thank Helen for the introduction. I'm Beatrice Franzolini from Bocconi University. And okay, sorry. And indeed I will talk about the great gender gap, evidence from RiminiInRete, as the title suggests, and as Helen was mentioning. We're going to look at the differences in grades based on the gender of the students, so differences between male and females. And the data that we use come from RiminiInRete, so let me start telling you a little bit about RiminiInRete, for those who are not familiar with it. So RiminiInRete is a network that was established in 2015, and the goal basically of this project is to connect and link all the evaluations that are in the school in the province of Rimini. So schools are collecting grades of their students, and basically to connect them all within a network. The idea when the network started was basically the main goal was to try to establish the consistency between the advice that usually teachers gives at the end of middle school when a student has to choose the high school, let's say, secondary school, and see basically if this advice made sense. But today we're not going to talk about this. We are going to look indeed at the differences in grades between male and females. So if you are curious about RiminiInRete, you can go on their website, it's the RiminiInRete.net, and don't make the same mistake I did submitting the abstract. There's just an I. The last I of Rimini is the first one of IN. So indeed, let's move to the grades and the gap study. So one nice feature about the RIR data set is that it has a longitudinal network, and you can follow each student and see his path of grades from elementary to middle to high school. And while there is a lot to study about differences in gender differences in scores, in standardized tests, and also in grades, not so many have this possibility to look at the temporal perspective. And so this is what we are trying to do here. So let's say that when we started this, we had four main goals. The first one, we wanted to quantify the gender difference, let's say overall. So have a measure of the differences in the grades between female and male, and let's say, to put it very simple, the question was like, do males receive a different evaluation on average in Italian, a specific subject, or in English, compared to females? But as I was mentioning, what is cool about the RIR dataset is that we have the temporal perspective. And actually, we can think to the temporal perspective in two different ways. So the first one is that we can think about picking, let's say, one cohort of students. They all started together, school in 1 year, and what we would like to know is that if moving to across primary and then middle and then secondary school, is there any difference in the gender gap that they are receiving? Is the gender gap becoming bigger towards the path? Is becoming lower, is decreasing, or is staying the same? And then also there is another temporal evolution that is comparing different cohorts, because the RIR dataset was created in 2015, and this means that the oldest data of evaluations are for the scholastic academic year 2012-2013. And so basically it's been a while, and so we may also wonder, has been any change in time. Finally, we will also look at the interaction in terms of differences between gender and nationality. And what we're going to do there is basically see if there's gender gap as changing, whether we consider Italian students or foreigner students enrolled in the schools in the province of Rimini. So, just quickly about which data we are using. So we are in, for this one, actually for what I'm presenting, we are not using the entire RIR data set. So in this sense, you can consider this a pilot study, and we are extending it to the whole data set. The data set is very big. We are looking at today 3,000 students, and we follow each of them for a maximum of 7 years. Because we are we're starting looking at their grades in 2013-2014 up to 2019-2020. Okay, this maybe can be quick. Each student enters our study when receive their first evaluation in one of the schools in the province of Rimini, either primary or middle school, and then basically he exits, we stop following him, either if he completes the second cycle of study, so he gets his diploma, let's say, is a dropout, we lose track of him, and it's okay, he exits the study, and then we can also have like partial information for students that actually goes outside of the province of Rimini, so they change province, and we don't have information about them anymore. Or also if they just, we stopped in 2019-2020, if they didn't get the diploma by that time, we of course cannot see what happens after 2019-2020. But usually when you have sensor data in statistical analysis, you should be careful about this. But we are not too worried about these two mechanisms of censoring because they are unlikely to be related with the phenomenon we are studying. So, basically these are the variables that we are considering. I will not list them all, but just to anticipate this because this may have an impact on what we found. Basically we had to have a definition of what is a foreigner student, and we had a conservative kind of definition. Basically we will consider foreigner student anyone that is born outside of Italy, even if with an Italian nationality at birth, and also those that were born in Italy but didn't have an Italian citizenship at birth. So let's say a very big definition of foreigner. This is kind of conservative because in this way, if we find any difference for foreigner students, we are kind of safe, like it should be there. But this is just super quick. The grades we are considering is like overall average, math grade, the average of math and science, Italian grade, English and behavior. That on the left-hand side is the correlation matrix. Everything is very highly correlated. This usually happens with grades. Like good students are typically good students in all the subjects. And the less correlated is the behavior, which makes sense, but don't be mistaken, let's say like the blue color is still positive correlated. And this is just a distribution of male and female is more or less 50-50, both in the Italian student and in the foreigner students. So these are just summary statistics, and on this slide I would like just to make you notice this. So considering 3,000 students for a maximum of 7 years, it means that we have more or less up to 2,000 data points, so numbers. And this slide is, what I want to say is mainly to congratulate who handle the real data set, because like if you look for instance the math grades, out of 2,000, almost 2,000 data points, there are only 24 missing, which I think is great. Usually it's not like that. They did slightly less well for the behavior grade, but overall they did a good job, a great job. So I will not be too technical about the models. We estimated different models to reply to the research questions, but the core is basically this one. So the response variable grade is the evaluation. So from 1 to 10, the grades that they have in a specific subject. and we are trying to predict it or to explain it using the gender of the student, class. I mean first year primary school, second year primary school. I'm not using grades because otherwise it's the same word I'm using for the evaluation. FSSA for foreigner students. And then we have these terms here that we don't know, and we are learning them from the data, and basically we are supposing that there may be an effect for the cohort. So, for instance, we started the school in 2006, and those that started in 2012 may have a different experience in the grade they are having. This one here will be important because actually this is a student-specific effect. Basically, this term here, what it's doing, is telling us if a student overperformed his peers for consistently along his academic path. Okay, and then basically we modify this model a little bit, but the core is that to have different answer. And so I moved to the result. So this is the model I was just talking about, is the plain vanilla one. Basically here in the plot you have the estimate for that coefficient there in red. There's basically, you can interpret this number as the advantage of female compared to males. So since these numbers are positive, this means that females, on average, without considering, let's say, a specific class, a specific grade, a specific cohort, on average in our data set, females achieve higher grades, on average, than males. The biggest difference is in behavior, with a difference of 0.6 and something in grades. Then Italian, math, science, this is math and science, English, and the first one is the overall average. So from this picture, overall, females are getting higher grades. Of course, the limits of this is that this is overall, and also is that we are kind of looking to an ideal average student. And so what we wanted to know is maybe this is different if we look at the top students that are there. And the bottom, which is an awful term, refer to people, of course, but let's say those that are taking lower grades are less performing. What happens there between male and females? And so, like, yes, I don't want to be too technical, but I can talk about this. Basically, we had to find a way to define what is the top 5% of the students, because we have this longitudinal perspective, so it's not obvious what is the top 5. If I had just one vote, it's clear, it's the best votes, but with a longitudinal perspective, it's not that clear, so there is kind of statistical way, bit technical to do it. And basically, if you agree with that definition of top 5%, this is how the graph changes. The graphical representation changes, and basically what happens is that in math and science now the gap is against female. So if you look at the top 5% of students, actually males get higher grades, and the all other gaps or gender differences are not statistically significant. So here the only, let's say, statistical significant true that are there are these two, which are math and science. We did the same with the bottom 5% of students, and here they are not statistically significant than 0. So in the bottom 5% there's not much there. There's basically no difference. So, longitudinal perspective. So, as you can see, it's the same as before. Those are the gender gap. Thank you. Those are the gender gaps, but now instead of having just one bar, I have 13 of them, and each is one for each class or grade. So basically here, there's no, within the path of a student along these 13 years of school, it seems that the gender gap stays more or less stable. You can see a few peaks here for English and here for Italian. Nonetheless, that is the last year of middle school, and we had the impression a little bit that in that year, grades polarized a little bit. And so maybe a consequence of that. It's just the grades are polarizing a little bit, so it's not, what we think right now is that it's not really that the gender gap becomes bigger. This instead is the temporal perspective in terms of different cohorts, and we don't have that many, we have just 8, if I'm not mistaken, yes. And even this is rather stable, let's say. There is no one evident trend. So at least for these 8 groups of students, they more or less experience the same thing. Finally, a relation with interaction between gender and foreigner students. So on the left-hand side, you have the gap now between Italian and foreigner students. So it's actually a big gap. Because, for instance, in Italian, foreigner students have 1 grade less on average. So there is a big difference in the grades that foreigner students have compared to Italian. But when you look at splitting this based on gender, it's more or less the same. So for studying, let's say that is a bad news, but it's not what we are studying. This is a good news because it doesn't change much. The gender gap experienced by Italian students is the same experience by foreigner students, except for behavior, where the gender gap is bigger for foreigner students. Of course, that's why I said we had a conservative definition of foreigner. It may be, and we will try, that if we restrict a little bit the definition of foreigner, this may look different. So that's that. And summing up, what we found out is that on this data set, on average, girls tend to achieve higher grades in all the subjects. When we narrow to the top 5% of students, the boys have higher grades in maths and science, and the advantage of the girls become not significant. Bottom 5%, no statistical difference between. We think that this is in line with some of the results in Western countries. For what concerns trends, we didn't find so far particular significant patterns, say in time, in both the time dimension we were looking at. And for foreigner students, the gender gap more or less remained the same. And I will conclude just telling you a little bit, because as I was mentioning, this is kind of a pilot study. We want to replicate on the full population of students, and also including additional years. Including additional years will also allow us to see what happened with COVID. We stopped with this at the year where the COVID started. So maybe COVID has decreased or increased the gender gap. We don't know, we would like to find out. And then we also are looking at some more advanced methodological thing to put everything together, this kind of stuff. And that's it. I don't have a thank you slide, but thank you if you have any questions.